Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Thomas H. Johnson volume. We turned out a poem 652, A Prison Gets to Be a Friend. Now, we go from the previous poem we just studied, 651, So Much Summer, now to this poem, and we're back again to a trapped Emily, a rejected Emily. We're back to another theodicy poem. Our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. Hey guys, do you remember in our intro lecture that we commented on the big five of Room 303? What does this text say about epistemology, what you can know? We're certainly going to have some of that here. Ontology, who we are, for sure we're going to have some of that here. Psychology, the study of the individual mind, its motivations and its fears. And then sociology, the study of the collective or group mind in its motivations and fears. We're going to have some of both of that here. But then finally in our big five, there was the question of theodicy. Theodicy, theo, God, dike, the Greek etymology for justice. Why must there be pain and suffering in the world? We're immediately, of course, back to our study of Milton and Paradise Lost. What does he call it? To justify the ways of God to men. We've given full lectures on Paradise Lost at learnstrong.net. Now, our other assumption here is that you've already finished our study of the previous 651 poems. As we said, we just finished with So Much Summer. And if you have, the echoes of this poem will be very, very reminiscent. There has been a number of times that Emily has played around with the simple question, what is it like to be stuck in a situation you can't get out of? Now, I think a whole lot of Hamlet is standing behind this poem. I think that Hamlet's, what does he say in his first act soliloquy, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. As he says, it is not nor cannot come to any good, this relationship between his mother and his uncle, before he ever discovers that his father's been murdered. I think here we have another poem about the acceptance of suffering here as well. The maybe here is the quest to be set free, right? In the question of heaven. And is it possible maybe heaven is the only chance to be set free? You'll see the skepticism of Emily at the end of this poem as well. And then I want you to think about a poem that is written by what some people will call Emily as a recluse. We have stayed away from that, or agoraphobic, or any of those other kind of terms, but certainly you could make the argument that Emily spent much of her time in her bedroom alone, where it first starts out as prison, and it ultimately becomes the place that is her room of one's own, is what Virginia Woolf will call it, right? She says it this way: a prison gets to be a friend, between its ponderous face and ours, a kinsmanship express, and in its narrow eyes we come to look with gratitude for the appointed beam it deal us, stated as our food and hungered for the same. We learn to know the planks that answer to our feet, so miserable a sound at first, nor ever now so sweet, as plashing in the pools when memory was a boy, but a demure circuit, a geometric joy, the posture of the key, the that interrupts the day to our endeavor, not so real, the cheek of liberty, as this phantasm steel, whose features day and night are present to us as our own, and as escapeless quite, the narrow round, the stent, the slow exchange of hope for something passiver, content, too steep for looking up, the liberty we knew, avoided like a dream, too wide for any night but heaven, if that indeed redeem. Now it may be that she has saved her most important word for the last word of the poem, redeem. Of course, a theologically laden word for Emily, no doubt. To redeem, though, is to give some value to. And notice, this is a poem where Emily gives value to something that normally you would hate, prison. Notice the phrase gets to be. Of course, she'll use the word learn later. A prison gets to be a friend. I can't help but think of her contemporary Thoreau, who will say it in Walden, we must learn to reawaken and to keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn that will not forsake us in our soundest sleep. And I think here this idea at the conclusion of this poem is to play around with something similar. We endure this for possibly the freedom of that, assuming that exists. Notice we begin with the word prison. Now, she'll use this in 8 of her poems. It's fascinating. When we get to poem 1334, we'll come back to this idea of prison. How soft this prison is. How sweet these sullen bars. No despot but the king of down invented this repose of fate. If this is all, has he no added realm, a dungeon, but a kinsman is incarceration home. I think she's playing a very similar game here. We have to understand that escape sometimes is not a possibility. So one must learn to accept the situation that one is in. We've seen this in a number of poems already of Emily's. Notice this process gets to be a friend between its ponderous face, the prison's face, and ours. In other words, coming to accept the metal bars, right? The fact that there's not going to always be the posture of a key to let us out. And then we've got the kinsmanship, the relationship. And then we've got the narrow eyes. Again, it's all about how one looks. We, notice several times here, it's the we. It's ours and it's we. Emily inviting you in. Chats with Emily is what we called our playlist for a reason. Emily seems to invite us into, hey, let me share how we think about this thing of a prison becoming something other than that. We come to look with gratitude for the appointed being, right? In other words, we grow accustomed to the way that the room is constructed. It, deal us, stated as our food and hungered for, the same. In other words, we grow to accept the thing that we must accept because it is the food that we must eat. And then we learn to know. Now, I think Emily's playing some very complicated games here, and she's trying to disclose something about her own experience of coming to terms with the pain and the suffering of her life. We learn to know the planks, right? In other words, the construction of the room that answer to our feet, right? When you're incarcerated, you're walking back and forth, right? So miserable a sound at first, nor ever now so sweet. We grow accustomed to it. It's that great idea that is so ubiquitous in literature, that it's Odysseus sitting on his Calypso's island. It's so many different moments in literature when you have the hero who's kind of stuck and can't get out. It's Prometheus being chained, if you will. And after a while, you just kind of grow to accept that this is the way things are, and there's kind of no way out of it, if you will. So, the use of the word miserable. But finally, it becomes sweet. And then she uses an interesting simile. Plashing, short for splashing, in the pools when memory was a boy. Now we're back to childhood, as opposed to obviously what adulthood is like. But a demure circuit, a geometric joy. Demure and geometric only get used once in all her poetry, and it's here. By the way, the word geometric here probably meaning measured joy. In other words, it isn't outright joy, it's more like a measured joy of a kind. The posture of the key that interrupt the day, the possibility of somebody opening the door. To our endeavor, that might be the key word of the poem, endeavor. In other words, there is something, her prison is what? Her endeavor? That is to say, her work as a poet, maybe we would say? Not so real, the cheek of liberty. In other words, there isn't any way out. Of course, this idea of the cheek of liberty, when we get to poem 720, we'll come back to this one more time. This is how she says it. No prisoner be where liberty himself abide with thee. This idea of the phantasm steel, the bars that hold up there. Notice phantasm. They may not actually be there. I mean, I can't help but read this and think of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. The idea that the things we're limited by, the cage that we must be forced to live inside of, will explain often why it's so difficult to sing. They are present, notice to us, not with us, as our own, notice both capitalized, and as escapeless, quite. Now, scholars have pointed out how Emily loves to take less and set it to words. She'll do this in 627, you'll remember, with graspless. In poem 724, it will be perturbless. And then in 770, it will be vitalless. Here it is, escapeless. You can't get out, quite. In other words, you're stuck. No escape. No way to leave. And then she'll come back to the narrow. Earlier it was narrow eyes, now it's the narrow round. The stent, the short exchange of hope. Notice, the slow exchange of hope. In other words, you exchange being able to get out with the whole acceptance, which is a different kind of hope. She'll, of course, say in another poem, hope is the thing with feathers, right? For something passiver. And then she'll use the word content. Acceptance. Too steep for looking up. In other words, there's too many ways to that things that have to happen for escape to ever actually happen. It's impossible to look up. Of course, some have said this looking up is her referencing to possibly prayer. And it's not clear that prayer is an advantage here. You'll remember in an earlier poem, of course I prayed, right? Too steep for looking up. It's too hard for prayer. The liberty we knew, notice we're back now to the cheek of liberty, avoided, and then the second of the similes, like a dream, right? Too wide for any night. But heaven, I told you guys, she uses heaven in 135 of her poems. If that, dash, indeed, dash, redeem, dash, that is to say, maybe even the concept of heaven for Emily is also an understanding of a different kind of prison that ultimately must be accepted as a friend. I think a two-way the argument she's making is that we have to learn to accept what we can't always change and grow accustomed to that, accepting, content even to that. At 2b, well, obviously the symbolism of the prison. I mean, are we talking about the kind of boring life that she must live, and in some ways we're back to poem 613, that routine in poem 613, or is she talking about adulthood? Is she talking about the acceptance that she will be a poet that no one will ever read because she's never going to have her stuff published? It's interesting. Now, some scholars have pointed out that she might be referencing Lord Byron's The Prisoner of Chillon in this poem. In a letter 293, Emily confided to her cousins when she was stuck in Boston undergoing some eye treatment that we've already spoken about. In a letter 293, she wrote to her sister, quote, "Do you remember the prisoner of Chillon did not know liberty when it came and asked to go back to jail?" End quote. I can't help but think of Sartre's No Exit, Beckett's Waiting for Godot. There's so many titles that come to mind here, obviously. To own a poem like this, when was a time that you had to learn to accept the prison, and a terrible thing like a prison became somehow your friend that you were content with? Thank you.